call our meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, April 10th, and this is the regular monthly meeting of the Austin City Planning Commission. We have 4 open public hearings on our agenda for tonight. Before we get to that, I will ask the commissioners if you've looked at the minutes from our March 13th meeting. Any changes, corrections at this time? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
Motion to approve the minutes by Commissioner Meinel, Commissioner Lutz.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Meinel. Thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. The first item on our agenda tonight is it's an open public hearing again, to consider a petition from the City of Austin and Austin Utilities to approve a preliminary and final replat of their property at 501 4th Avenue Northeast.
So I thought I would do just a little bit of an introduction. So this is from the Vision 2020 website. This is a proposal of the proposed site plan for the facility. The project started conceptually in 2011 with the creation of Vision 2020. And then there's a timeline we have. The site location across the street was chosen in 2015. If you were here a little earlier, you could probably can still see now that they're doing the demolition. If you've been past that area, it's pretty obvious. At this point, we are preparing for the actual build, and so some of the things that we need to take care of are platting, property boundaries, rezoning, and then looking at some other issues where the project might not meet our specific requirements for the zoning designation that they hope to have. So the first item, as Commissioner Kind noted, was the platting of the property. Oops. So the petitioners are currently, the property is owned by the City of Austin and Austin Utilities, and the petition was brought by the BWBR architects for the project. Here tonight we have some representatives who've been working on the project. We have the general contractor of the project, and we also have the surveyors engineering firm that drafted the plat. And we also have a couple of representatives from utilities in case you have any additional questions about the platting and rezoning. The area was platted at one point. Portion of it was also still meets and bounds, which is just more, I guess, complicated legal description. The platted property usually is broken down into lots and blocks. This property had initially several lots, as you can see here. And when we are looking at doing a project, the property boundaries will impact setback distances. They will impact some of our code requirements with regard to fire protection and distance from neighboring properties. So you can imagine if 2 buildings were built right next to each other on the same property line, there might be some additional requirements from our code perspective. So the property is being replatted to get rid of all of those additional lots and combine them into one big lot, which is this lot 1 in the center. And there are 2 other lots. Here is lot 2, and over here is lot 3. And lot 2 is reserving a substation that will remain on the property for a certain time period. And then lot 3 will have the current reservoir and pump station. And those two properties will be, I believe they will be retained by the utilities, ownership by the utilities. And the remaining property will be the area where the rec center will be developed. The area of the platted property is 7.32 acres. There is a public right-of-way platted on this document, and the project will be about 105,000 square feet, and I think I have a drawing that shows that footprint. So this will go along with one of your upcoming matters. But this shows the drawing of the proposed facility in conjunction with the existing structures that will remain. The Planning Commission should consider whether the plat accomplishes the goal of creating an orderly property boundary and makes sense with the overall purpose of the project, and also should consider that the property will conform to our future land use map, and the indication of our future land use map is that it would be a mixed use property, and that it would be zoned for B3 Central Business District, which is the proposed zoning designation. The property is currently zoned I1 light industrial for the previous use, which was the Austin Power Plant. The property will have some easements added, and those were some additional documents included in your packet. But the easements will be done separately, is my understanding, as written documents. And I had recommended that the plat be recorded along with the easements to ensure that all of the agreements were, recorded properly and that they were all executed in a timely manner. However, it's my understanding that the property needs to be transferred from the current ownership to ultimately undetermined, who would go to the city? Ultimately would go, okay, thank goodness we got a lawyer here. Would go to the city, and at that point it would, the easements would, the grantee and the grantor of the easements would be determined at that point, and so the utilities would be getting an easement. Correct. Yes. So until that actually happens, the easements can't be executed. So there's some gap in time, or as a practical matter, determining when that actual transfer will happen determines when the easements will be executed. So I guess so the point is that the easements wouldn't be able to necessarily be recorded at the same time as the plat. The plat would need to be recorded, completed and recorded, approved and recorded prior to the building starting, which would be proposed, I think, in July would be groundbreaking. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but if you have any questions, let me know. And we also still have the utilities, the general contractor, and the surveyor here to add some details if needed.
Okay. Any other questions at this time from the commissioners?
Holly, on the southwest corner of the property, there's a strip that's 29 foot wide that seems to be, have been omitted from what, so it takes out part of block 5, or lot 5. Is
Are you
there-
talking about this,
Yeah.
that strip
yeah.
right there?
It's shown on a plat, 29
have it
by
as-
320, I think it is.
Here I have it proposed as part of the berm. Does that make sense? That's the strip. Let me grab the.
Can only assume that that's already the westerly property line of the site? That knockout was likely done as part of the library project?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the,
That makes sense?
this is the piece you're talking about right here. This is
Yeah,
it right here.
Yes, that was part of the library project.
You have any other questions? Oh, yeah, well, they'll, once the commissioners are done asking questions, then they'll open it up to the public. That's okay.
So this is quite a, I mean, it's a multi-step process, procedure
Yeah, everything's
So
kind of
it's-
dependent on the
as we go.
piece before it,
Okay,
and there's a lot of things going on,
as we go along, okay,
yeah.
okay. Yes, this is an open public hearing, so if there's any members here in public that would like to speak, feel free to do so. Yes. Please come up to the podium and if you could state your name and address, please.
Or I can give you my microphone. You can just stay.
My name is Carol Limbrick, and I live at 1301 3rd Street Northwest. I was wondering how many parking spaces there are.
Right now, we are just addressing the plat, but there will be another item on the agenda regarding parking, so then we'll go into that in detail at that point, if that's okay, if you want to just wait.
Well, I'll be glad to wait, but I am a member of the current YMCA, and it is important to have enough parking around there. And, you know, I don't know how much of it is chatter and how much of it is fact, but I've heard that we may have to park down at the arena. That would not work for me, I know.
Yeah, they would also have some accessible spots, which are required by law. And we would, I guess we'll go into that in more detail when we get to that item. Okay.
Thank you for that. Is there any other comments, questions? Yes.
Just for the benefit of the public and maybe the commissioners, want to focus attention on what this particular item is on the agenda. It's really to define new property lines so that the portion of the property that Austin Utilities will continue to own that's occupied by a large blue water tank right now and some other facilities is its own designated lot, and the rest of the property can be designated as a different lot so that when it comes time to transfer the property to ultimately the city, that we can properly do a deed that describes what's being transferred and what's not being transferred. So right now, the plat is really just to divide the property into chunks. Some of what Ms. Wallace was saying earlier was a lot of times on a plat, you'll see a lot of other things like utility easements or utility rights of way, things like that, that are very important for you to look at in a private development plat to make sure that the public's interest in utility placement is right and accurate and portrayed. And since the utilities owns it, establishing an easement in favor of the utilities on land that's already owned for them creates some complexity. But the public should know that the City of Austin and the utilities will make sure that the utilities are placed in proper places that the utilities would want them and the city would want them at a later date. So it's a little bit weird that way. But right now, technically, just this part of the meeting is just about whether we can split this into these 2 lots as part of a plat. And then we'll move on to some other subjects that I think are going to be of much more interest to the public as far as maybe some layout and some parking and some other issues. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. With that, are there any other questions? Commissioners? Any other comments from our public? Okay, again, this is just to approve the replatting of the property. So I will ask for a motion.
I move to approve the plat as presented.
I have a motion by Commissioner Postma to approve.
This is a recommendation.
Yeah, this is actually a recommendation to the council.
Recommendation, okay.
So noted.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Mino. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. The second item on our agenda is to consider a petition from the City of Austin and Austin Utilities to approve a rezone of the property located at 501 4th Avenue Northeast to an I-1 Light Industrial District to a B3 Central District Business District.
Yes, so again, the BWBR architects on behalf of the City of Austin and Austin Utilities have asked the city to consider a rezone of this property from an I-1 Limited Industrial District to a B3 Central Business District. The present land use is the former Austin Power Plant, which is being demoed. Again, noting the timeline that was presented, the proposal is to start actual construction of the proposed rec center sometime in July. The site plan that's been developed has been developed with the intent that the property would be zoned B3. So all of the setbacks and requirements for the zoning of the site would be based on the B3 zone, and this zoning would allow, it's called our Central Business District. It's to permit, the purpose is to permit and encourage the establishment of a wide variety of goods and services in the central business area in such a way as to attract consumers from a large trade area. Only those activities that would materially interfere with the overall function of that central business area would be excluded. Generally, it allows all principal or conditional uses permitted in our community business district, and then all of our uses that are permitted in our residential districts. Primarily allows trades and services, some limited industrial uses, commercial parking, garages, and lots. And all the businesses should be, business activities should be should be happening in an enclosed area, and storage of materials should be in interior, except with, there's some minimal exceptions. Some of the considerations you should take into, should consider with regard to rezoning would be that the consistency of the proposed zoning with the goals, policies, and future land use map of the comprehensive plan. This property is designated as mixed use. Just shows the future land use plan and the approximate location of that facility, or that parcel. So this is the Mill Pond area here. The big orange area is the property that we're currently discussing. You should consider the compatibility of the site with the uses permitted in the proposed zoning district. Here they are surrounded by the Cedar River and commercially zoned properties, primarily service industries. You should consider the compatibility of all the potential uses allowed in the proposed zoning district with the surrounding uses, and determine the impacts on the environment, density, nature of use, traffic impacts, aesthetics, infrastructure, and potential influence on property values. And I think generally with regard to our future land use plan and the surrounding uses, the commercial zone, the B3 commercial zone would be more compatible with the surrounding uses than the existing industrial zone. You should consider the capacity of the existing infrastructure and services sufficient to accommodate the uses permitted in the district without compromising the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. In this instance, there were no concerns raised about the zoning other than I did get one email concerned about the parking issue, and they indicated that because there was insufficient space for the required parking, that it was overall a poor site for the rec center location. And that was the only comment that I had received from the public. So in that way, it would relate possibly to the B3 zone. The B3 zone, as I will talk about in the next matter, would impact the zoning requirements or the off-street parking requirements. So back to the zoning. Should consider, let's see, compliance, of course, with city, state, and federal laws would be required. You should consider whether the uses permitted in the proposed zoning district will cause detrimental environmental impacts. In this instance, this proposed zoning should lessen those potential impacts, other than the demo and construction period, which will be temporary. And then, of course, during that time period, there are regulations as well for controlling any environmental impacts. Should also consider the boundaries, that the boundaries are sufficient to meet the dimensional regulations for the proposed zoning district. And the B3 zoning district, no specific parcel dimensions are required. And you should consider the ability of the applicant to satisfy any requirements, site plans, et cetera, applicable to the specific use. In this instance, meeting the parking requirements would be really, could be an issue in any of the zoning designations that we have. I think the B3 probably is the most flexible in this instance. And there may be some options, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, to mitigate the issue due to allowance of a waiver of required parking if there's adequate parking within 300 feet of the building. And that's all I have. Do you have any specific questions or concerns about the B3 zoning district specifically? And this again is a recommendation to council.
So this is consistent then with our comprehensive plan in terms of the
Yes.
land use?
Yes.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Hearing none. It is an open public hearing, I'm sorry. Does anyone here wish to speak about this rezoning plan? Okay. I'll ask for a motion, and as a part of the motion, would you please reference those considerations that Holly went through for us as a basis for the motion? This is a recommendation.
To approve or deny the rezone request.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend the rezoning to the city council including the considerations 1 through 7, that it meets all those considerations.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Mino.
I second, Your Honor.
Have a second from Commissioner Burrows. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next item, again, is another open public hearing to consider a parking appeal from the City of Austin and Austin Utilities for the property located at 501 4th Avenue Northeast, appealing a requirement of 208 parking stalls for the Community Rec Center. The city proposes 116 spaces on-site with an off-site street and public parking at Riverside Arena to make up the remaining 92 spaces. This action is pursuant to Austin City Code, Section 11.70, Subdivision 1H5.
So again, this is relating to the property as noted at 501 4th Avenue Northeast. Initially talking to the architects, they had, and this was a couple of months, actually it started in November, they had talked about using some of the street parking around the facility. And then as I was preparing the materials for this application, or for the Planning Commission, talked to our city engineer and learned a little bit more about what their plans were for the streets around the rec center. And it is clear that that's probably, the street parking is probably not the best option. That the arena area would be more practical, I guess, for additional parking if needed. So the off-street parking recommendations or requirements are based on the B3 zone. The requirement is 1 parking space for every 500 square feet, and the facility is approximately 105,000 square feet. So the requirement is 208 spaces. The additional stalls would be 92 stalls, and the Riverside Arena is within that 300 feet of the site on 4th Avenue. The parking proposed meets approximately 56% of the required parking, and we have additional information here, and I'll put it up on the numbers up here so you can see them. And our city engineers here as well if you have additional questions. So the existing YMCA is a 50,000 square foot facility, has 134 parking stalls, is required to have 100. The new rec center is about double, 104,000 square feet. They have 116 on-site off-street parking. They are required to have 208, so they're 92 stalls short. The Riverside Arena lot has 175 parking stalls, and typically occupied are 50, so 125 available spaces. There has been, I understand, discussion about that shortfall with the project proposers and the project architects, designers. As noted, the volume of overflow parking would likely require additional on-street parking signage, limiting parking during parking duration and identifying no parking areas. Additional signage in the library and city hall parking lots designated those lots for customer use. Clearly designating the Riverside Arena lot for overflow parking. And let's see. Yeah, I think those are the 3 main points. And The building footprint that they did choose was one that did attempt to maximize their on-site parking. We do have alternate usage, I guess, with the Riverside Arena typically would have more nighttime activities, and the rec center would have more daytime activities. And maybe, let's see, maybe we would have some additional weekday evenings at the rec center would be higher use. There would be times, of course, during the course of the year when both facilities would have concurring events, and then at those times there would be, the lots would be at capacity, and then, of course, would require a greater distance to attend events or to use the facility. And then this is kind of a graphic illustration of where the current parking lots are. So the light blue or teal color is the City Hall parking lot. The kind of purple color is the Riverside Arena. Dark blue is the library. And yellow is the proposed rec center parking area.
Will there ever be a point in time when the big blue reservoir will be removed?
Yeah, well, at the utilities.
Yeah, as part of the conditional purchase agreement, we have a 10-year window to have that removed. So
At which time additional parking may become part of that, okay.
So just in case that didn't get caught on our video, so the comment was that in about 10 years that structure would be eliminated.
Okay. Any other questions from the commissioners?
Holly, could you pull up, there's a picture I have in my packet with the map of the parking spots by the rec center, and it's shaded in purple where the slots are. Do you have that you could throw up on the screen?
Yeah, I think I do have it up here, actually. Mine might not be.
It's on my iPad. I'm not, well, maybe it'll say.
I think she had it up earlier.
Looks like that.
Yeah.
Can I think it's. I think I might have put it aside with some of the other materials. Yeah, thank you. Is that the one you're?
It is.
Thinking of,
And if
okay.
you could zoom in, I don't know if they can zoom in or a little bit or not. One of the questions I have is, so I'm seeing 3 handicap spots clearly labeled on this. I'm curious to know if that will be all, and is that set on the amount of parking spaces that we have here, or on what it would have if there was not a variance given?
I think there's 6.
6, yeah. Sorry if I misspoke.
You know, from what I recall, the accessibility is based on the existing stalls that are provided. So whatever the current parking is, a certain percentage, like 1 in X number of stalls is required, accessible stalls is required per existing stalls.
Okay.
So it would impact, so yeah, the number of stalls existing on the site would impact the number of accessible required.
Is it based on how many are on site or how many are required for
It's-
total, for the 212?
208.
You know, I would have to go back and double check.
I guess the second question to that is, there been discussion about any other designation other than handicap?
No, not that I'm aware of. Only, so whatever is required by law would be required on the site.
Okay.
Any other questions from the commissioners? At this point, again, this is an open public hearing, so if you would like to speak, now's the time.
Yes.
Again, I'm Carol Lembrick, and I live at 1301 3rd Street Northwest. And I'm really not here for this hearing, but as long as I'm here, I'll ask a few questions. Maybe you covered this and I missed it, but like on the weekends, the arena can be very busy. And on the weekends, the Y can be very busy. They have swim meets and things like that. So maybe the arena would be using their parking on the weekends when the Y people would be needing additional parking. Have you considered that, or did you say that? I can't.
Yeah, there would potentially be conflict from time to time, where there may not be enough spaces for both users. Our experience, though, I believe, with the current use of Riverside Arena would be that there would be plenty of overflow parking for the most part during the hours of use of the rec center. But how many people would choose to park at the rec center or close to the rec center, or how many people would, I guess, drop people off and leave, or, I mean, we don't know for sure, I guess, what the actual need would be versus what we just require by our ordinance, which, we adopted many years ago and seemed to suit the uses that we've established to date. So that's what we use as our guide for parking, but we wouldn't know for certain, what the actual need would be. I'm sure that there have been other, as noted, I mean, they're trying to maximize the parking available on the site so that the users, are not going to be inconvenienced or have to, park across the street or in nearby on-street parking. But there may be instances where there just are not available parking spots. It would be, the parking recommended is assuming, I believe, that the property or the use would be to capacity. So if that place was completely filled up, we'd have 208 parking spaces needed, but we'd only have 116 on the site.
I'd like to hear somebody speak to the issue of the proposed solution, which is to come to this body and ask for variance versus other proposed solutions.
It's actually not a variance. The B3 zoning allows because it's downtown, because it's central business district, there's always going to be parking conflicts potentially between the buildings and trying to find space for parking on site. So it accounts for parking garages or parking lots located within 300 feet of that facility to accommodate maybe sites that don't have enough space for their own parking and to allow development that probably wouldn't happen otherwise. So so this is actually an allowed, assuming that the B3 zoning is approved, that's what the parking ordinance would allow.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Mr.
So to give some perspective to that question, Top 10 Noodle, the restaurant in a building in the B3 district. Most of the buildings in the B3 district occupy almost the entire lot, so don't have off-street parking. When that became a restaurant, the off-street parking requirements changed because there's off-street parking requirements specific to restaurants. And because there's a city lot across the street, there was a recognition by the commission under the provision that allows you to do this to say, Off-street parking is not required because there's ample parking in the public parking lot across the street. So that accommodated that business to occupy that location. It's not a variance because it's built in, as Ms. Wallace said, in the downtown area because of the coverage and because most lots don't have off-street parking, to allow you to just take a look at what is the available parking and what is the available on-site versus anything within 300 feet to decide if it will work or won't work. So it is sort of a natural and customary thing to look at, available parking across the street. The questions that have been raised are legitimate questions, considering the use of the Riverside Arena, considering the use of the library, considering some of the other uses that may already be taking advantage of those off-street locations. Are we still going to create an unacceptable level of parking conflict with this use or not? And that's the issue that you're trying to weigh right now, is how often will that happen? How big of an issue will that be? The rec center parking is based upon square footage, which a couple of things that kind of play into that compared to their current building are, it's twice the size, but does that mean that there's going to be twice the members, twice the uses, twice the number of cars? Or does it mean that they've been packing a lot into a small space now, and now those uses will be spread out and more acceptable to the members that they have? They're of course hoping for more members, but will it be twice? I don't know. On the other hand, there's going to be the aquatic center that's introduced that will be available to the public on a pay-per-use basis. So the general public will be trying to use that part. That is some level of parking that we can't accurately predict until we see it. So some of this is just your judgment on, does it make sense? Will the uses conflict? Will there be too much pressure for parking considering all the available alternatives? And in reference to an earlier question about the handicapped site, the number of spots, if that is a concern when you're waiving the on-site parking, you could say that that is conditioned upon the provision of the amount of on-site handicap spots that would normally be required, considering the total number of, if that's something that was of concern to you. Otherwise, as Ms. Wallace said, whatever number is required by law is how many number they will provide.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Byron. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes.
My name is John Limerick, and I also live at 1301 3rd Street. One of the things that I have not heard addressed along with the parking is the safety of people crossing the street from the arena parking lot over to the rec center. And going by the Y quite often, there's little kids running everywhere. And so that issue has not been addressed, and I would like to see that Commission, in part of their recommendation, address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there
Maybe I could ask a question of Mr. Lang that would probably clarify this, but I think in some locations around the city, you now have signage that also has electronics so that people can push a button and create a flashing light for crossing the street? And is there an intent to maybe do that here?
We have looked at a traffic study along 4th Avenue, something that was just completed this winter in anticipation for concerns about pedestrian crossings and things like that. And as part of that recommendation from our consultant, they do not believe that any control improvements need to be made. The current stop condition on 4th Street and a through traffic on 4th Avenue meets all the necessary warrants for traffic and pedestrian movement. But one thing that they have recommended as part of that is to construct bump outs at the intersections to make the crossing distance shorter. So at this time, we don't necessarily have plans for flashing beacons, pedestrian activated flashing beacons, as Mr. Mino was describing, but more bump outs in the parking lanes to make that crossing distance shorter for pedestrians when they want to cross at an intersection, or if they're say they're parking in the Riverside Arena parking lot and they need to get to the rec center, they'd need to walk to this 4th Street intersection and then cross there. So those are things that we are looking at that would come later on in the project design.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's the waiver for the number of parking stalls. Is there, by chance, any kind of waiver for green space so that we could add more stalls on the site?
There is no requirement of any green space. Actually, in the B3 district, they could get rid of all the green space if they needed to. I think they, being a, I think wanting it to be a, I guess to showcase the facility and to make it someplace pleasant for people to visit and to, I guess, increase the aesthetic of the property. That's where the landscaping plan has come in. But I don't know that we have a final landscaping plan. But there is also some area that has been reserved for the berm for the flood control project behind the, I guess, to the east and the north ends of the property.
And if the footprint of the water tower were to be used to create more parking spaces, approximately how many more would we be getting?
I don't really have a good guess on that, but I think it would cover probably most. Your guess is as good as mine.
Everybody speak to that issue?
What are we short, 56, is it?
92, we're short.
92. We're not gonna get 92.
That's probably at another 50.
That's what I was thinking.
Kind of follow up on Commissioner Lutz's question. The levee footprint has not been defined, and there's it appears that there's green space reserved for that in the future, but if it does not require all that space, is that potential parking?
Well, I think some of the green space, and maybe Mr. Lang can speak to this. I mean, I think there's some stormwater maybe requirements, so maybe some, concerns about stormwater runoff, and maybe the way that the water might impact the property with it being all paid versus having the green space.
The levee will encompass all of the space to the north and the east. For instance, the levee will come right up to the parking lot, the northerly parking lot of the two that are shown there. The levee starts right at the edge of the parking lot and continues north to the pedestrian trail. And then it curves around the building and it's right up next to the water tank on the east side. And so all the available green space that you see to the north and east is taken up by the levee.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I didn't answer your question. I was thinking more of the additional green space that was proposed in the plan.
Any other questions, or anybody else wish to speak? Okay, hearing none, I will ask for a motion. And maybe just reference partially what we talked about here in terms of the acceptance of the parking parameters. Anyone want to make a motion?
Trying to find the page to figure out where
Okay.
the considerations are.
I think if you find just this with the,
So
I would just reference the discussion that we,
yeah, I said the number of stalls in the square footage.
So I would make a motion to, is this a recommendation or an approval, Holly?
this is a recommendation to the council.
So I'd make a motion to recommend to the council that we approve the current off-street parking appeal submitted by the city in regards to the new recreation center.
Second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Postma, a second by Commissioner Young. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
So that concludes all of our rec center items. So if those parties who are here on that topic want to stay, they can stay. If they want to leave, they can leave. And then we'll finish up with our last item.
Okay. The last item on our agenda is to consider a request from Gold Cross to approve a rezone of the property located at 4th Street Northwest from an R1 single-family residential district to a B2 community business district.
Okay, let's see. Yeah. So the top diagram is showing kind of the size of the parcel of subject property. It's located off 4th Street Northwest at 1400. And then beneath that is the future land use map, which is showing its location relative to the rest of the city. So there's a little red dot right off the interstate right here, and it's the parcel to the south of that. So that the red filled in parcel is Hardee's, and then just to the south of Hardee's is this parcel. The petitioner has an agreement with the property owner to allow them to request the rezone for this property from an R1 single family residential district to a B2 community business district. This is a proposed ambulance service, and this use is not directly indicated in our zoning guidelines as to where it should go. We have specific uses regarding hospitals and medical facilities, which I think arguably it could be included in that designation. And in that instance, it could be allowed in an R1 zone as a conditional use. Another option as an office or service provider could be located in a commercial district. So the applicants chose to ask for a rezone to B2 community business rather than the other option. It just seemed to actually fit better in this instance as a commercial designation. Partly because of its location along the interstate in 4th Street Northwest. The property owners have approached me previously about rezoning that area and as to a B2, I believe, to make it more attractive to a potential buyer. In this instance, they are working with Gold Cross Ambulance, and the proposal that they have is to add, again, an ambulance facility to the property. And I did talk to a few people about this project, some people who lived in the area, and we did send out notices to people within 300 feet of the subject property. So as you can see, there's a lot of, this is mostly residential around here. So there are a lot of residential properties in that location. And again, this is Hardee's to the north, and 4th Street here. The petitioner proposes to add a, so as I was saying, I did talk about the proposed site plan with a couple of people. In the meantime, I did get an updated site plan from the contractor, which looks a little different from the one that I talked to some of the neighbors about. So this is the most recent site plan, and it's kind of hard to see the property lines on here, but they go right along here, and then along the back, and then along the south here. And the building, this white object here is the proposed building. And then this would be some paved parking area here, and some green space there. The entrance lines up with the street across from it. The proposed setbacks are relative to a B2 zone. If it was an R zone, technically the distance would be 5 feet instead of 20. So for commercial property near residential, there's a requirement for greater setback. The rear setback again is 20 feet, which is right about here. Just kind of looking at some other details on the site plan here. So it indicates they would do some privacy screening, trash enclosure, more privacy trees along the south, and the area is fairly wooded now as it is. Again, so notices went out to properties within 300 feet. I received one phone call and a few visits. I think I received 2 visits from neighbors. And everybody was a little concerned about noise, potentially of the sirens that would be on for an emergency ambulance. The project proposers from Gold Cross and their contractor are here to answer any questions that you might have about the location and their plans for the property, and how they might accommodate or mitigate some of the concerns of the neighbors. And there are a number of residents from the area who are also here, who would be better able to, I guess, to describe their concerns themselves. So again, just as we talked about in the first rezone matter, I'll just go over some of the primary uses allowed in a community business district. Generally they allow anything in the other commercial districts, which is a B1. They also allow the uses allowed in residential districts. They allow small retail store establishments, personal services and business services, processing like bakery, laundry, catering, minor fabrication and repair, so like I don't know if you have TV repair shop, phone repair shop, painting and decorating kinds of shops, possibly commercial parking lots. Allows drive-in uses like banks and like Hardee's restaurants. Home businesses, I guess there's a residence there now that would be removed, but would allow home businesses in that property if they so desired. Would allow transient accommodations like hotels and motels, bed and breakfasts. some commercial recreation, vet clinics, again, residential, and with conditional use permits, some limited manufacturing, automotive services, and storage. If they also allow large retail establishments, which actually wouldn't fit on that property, so that's not really an option here. The considerations that the Planning Commission should I keep saying this as consideration. You should take into consideration the consistency of the proposed zoning with the goals, policies, and future land use map of the comprehensive plan. In this instance, our future land use plan shows this property as residential bordered by retail, commercial, and residential uses. A mixed use designation would be required for establishing a commercial zoning district in this area. So it would be an amendment to our future land use map. And the mixed use designation identifies areas intended to provide a mix of commercial, office, residential, public, institutional related issues in a walkable human scale environment. These areas may include a mix of retail and service, commercial, office, lodging, public institution, and higher density residential, park, and recreational uses. The mixed uses could be integrated, which means in the same facility, or they could be uses currently found in downtown Austin and the 18th Avenue corridor area, which not related to here, but that's what our definition is in our future land use, or in our comprehensive plan for mixed use. You should consider the compatibility of the site with the uses permitted in the proposed zoning district. And compatibility obviously would depend a great deal upon the development of the site. The Commission should also consider the compatibility of the potential uses allowed in the proposed zoning district with the surrounding uses. The subject property seems suitable for commercial development due to its proximity to I-90 and 4th Street Northwest, as well as similar uses to the north and the west. This use would be a transition between residential uses and maybe more intensive commercial activities, so the use as a ambulance service versus some other kind of commercial use. And then as the project is developed, the city would consider those impacts and any other comments or concerns expressed during the review of the proposed rezone, which would be like this meeting and that at our council meeting. You should consider the capacity of existing infrastructure and services sufficient to accommodate the uses permitted in the requested district. There have been no issues regarding infrastructure. This is a well-developed area, and an ambulance service is a vital part of community health services in considering the health, safety, and welfare of the residences. You should consider whether the uses permitted in the proposed zoning district will cause detrimental environmental impacts, including excessive stormwater runoff, water pollution, air pollution, noise pollution, excessive nighttime lighting, or other environmental harm. So in this instance, as noted, a lot of people have expressed concern about noise. They have also concerned potentially flashing lights, potentially maybe an issue or a concern. You should consider whether the boundaries of the area are sufficient to meet the dimensional regulations of the proposed zoning district and the minimum requirements are met here for a B2 zoning district, and whether the applicant could satisfy the zoning requirements for the proposed zoning designation. So with this site plan, they would be compliant with the requirements of that zoning district. From speaking to the proposed project proposers, their intention is to design the development to minimize any impacts on the surrounding uses. The building design, or the design locates the building close to the commercial parcel to the north and to the 4th Street to the west, with some buffer area on the back and to the south. And this is a recommendation to the City Council.
Okay, thank you. I think you answered, I think of 4th Street, I think of the traffic, you know, and just trying to pull out there sometimes. So I noted possibly flashing lights would be activated or something as that ambulance would enter the roadway. Is that what you're referring to here?
No, I think it's just the flashing lights of the ambulance.
Pardon?
Probably just the flashing lights of the ambulance.
Yeah, but I mean,
yeah,
like,
I don't know that we've come up with a, you know, specific requirement at this point for traffic entering onto 4th Street Northwest. I guess since our city engineer is here, maybe he can comment on any suggestions that the city might have for that.
Through the process, they've come up with a couple different designs, and we've worked very closely with them to make sure that they align their driveway with 13th Avenue, so that in the future, if we do put up a signal light or something to control traffic, at least their driveway is aligned with the roadway of 13th Avenue, and it would help to streamline a signalized intersection or something like that in the future. But no roadway improvements are planned as part of this project at this time.
I did, yeah, so I just wanted to make sure, I did mention that I did get some comments from the neighbors, but again, there's a lot of people here who may want to speak, so I'll just let them speak if they wish.
Okay, first I'll start with any of the commissioners with any questions.
Is there any sort of, I see kind of the perimeter line, is there any sort of fence being proposed to go around the property at this point? And if so, how high might that be?
There's no, you know, actually, now that I think about it, you know, we did require a fence for the Hardee's project, but I have not, I could not verify whether it's required, but I could let the project proposers speak to what they have proposed as, you know, some screening or items that they would add to the project to mitigate some of the concerns of the neighbors. So I just want to talk about that potentially.
Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Chris Calchin. I represent Gold Cross Ambulance, and my address is in Cleveland, Minnesota.
Thank you.
If it would please the commissioners, in getting to your questions, Mr. Postma, if I could just perhaps take a moment to provide a little bit of background on how we arrived at this rezoning request. As many of you are probably undoubtedly aware, we've been providing emergency service to the community for a very, very long time. Our current facility is located on Oakland Avenue, a little bit further west in town. And that location, due to a number of reasons, is simply not effective in meeting the current needs of the community for emergency care. The building is distressed, it's far too small. There's a number of issues related to parking, snow removal, and traffic with the one-way streets that are in that neighborhood. As our current needs and volumes have continued to arise in terms of the number of emergency calls in the city, it's been very clear to us for a period of time now that we've needed to make some improvements in the emergency service with regard to growth, capacity in terms of the number of employees as those call volumes have arisen. So about for the last 18 months or so, with that in mind, knowing that we needed to make some significant facility improvements, we've undertaken what I will call an exhaustive kind of look at the community in terms of determining where best to place a new facility, and then also reviewing the available property options that were available at the time during the community. We did work very closely with Holly and the city planning folks. We did evaluate about a dozen different properties in the community, some of which were recommended by city staff, some of which were recommended by local real estate brokerage agents, and a number of properties that are adjacent to or close by or nearby the hospital.
Of those, nearly all of them were not acceptable for a variety of reasons. This property we became aware of, we started looking very closely at it. In terms of the location in the city, what this map refers to here is each of those dots on the map is an emergency call that occurred within the city of Austin in a one-year period from March of 2017 up until March of just this last year, 2018. And so what we've kind of done is mapped out where those calls are, and then in evaluating the property, this little white dot right there represents the location of the subject property. The kind of bullseye rings around that represent response times. The red shaded area is within 1 minute, and the blue area is within 5 minutes, which from an industry standard sort of perspective is an excellent response time. That's what we're striving for, is to get to the greatest number of calls possible in the shortest amount of time when seconds count. This location, more than any of the others that we evaluated, enables us to get to the majority of those calls within a short period of time. It enables us quick and easy access to the interstate, which is important because we also cover, as many of you know, some of the rural areas surrounding the city of Austin. And it's also within close proximity to the hospital, which is important for us operationally because as the healthcare environment changes, the level of collaboration and cooperation directly with the hospital is anticipated to increase as we explore other community-based healthcare models. And so Gold Cross, while it is its own separate corporation, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Mayo Clinic. Our intention in being close to the hospital would be to help take advantage of some of our computer and IT infrastructure networks that exist on the hospital campus. With that in mind, last year we constructed a facility that we're proposing here very similar to this in Albert Lea. This is the Albert Lea facility pictured here. It's a nighttime picture. I apologize, I don't have something a little bit better, but it does kind of give some indication as to our intent with regard to the type of aesthetics that we would intend to incorporate into this facility to kind of be a blend or mix of commercial and residential as kind of that transition zone. So there's some siding and quite a bit of masonry brickwork around the building. And this building here that we're looking at is actually a little bit bigger than the one that we are proposing for Austin. Oh, wonderful.
That's
Yep.
your facility, right?
Yep, it is. Yep, so thank you. With regard to the site plan, to get more to the point of the question that you asked in the first place. Sometimes. Some of our thoughts in working with the city to come up with what would be an agreeable site plan for the area, we tried to really kind of anticipate perhaps what some of the concerns would be. They're certainly not unique to the city of Austin. We have facilities all across Minnesota and Wisconsin, and so quite frequently those concerns come up. And so we really tried to anticipate what those would be. A couple thoughts or things that went into the site plan in terms of mitigating some of the concerns that we suspected might arise with regard to noise was to position the building in such a way that the garage was closer to the north and west of the property by the gas station and up towards the Hardee's restaurant, that being the area where the majority of the noise at the facility would occur. So the southern part of the building is really more of an office space. So the ambulance, as they would come in off of the entrance off of 4th and circle the facility And these would actually be drive-through garage stalls. That's important for a couple reasons. One, the majority of ambulance accidents are when the ambulance is backing up. So in an effort to reduce accidents, drive-through stalls are important, but that also eliminates the need for commercial vehicles to be backing up with kind of the backup beeping alarm. So it eliminates the need for that and tries to keep any of that sort of vehicle noise up to the north and the west side of the property. The other thing it does or enables us to do is ambulance would exit, that noise is being projected to the west versus back towards the residential areas to the east and to the south. In terms of the fencing, which was your original question, it's difficult to see here on the plans, but kind of on the side of that drive around, wrap around area, we've planned or tentatively planning to put in some trees or arborvitae sort of shrubs that would kind of act as both a visual or aesthetic barrier to the residences to the south and also acoustically. I did make an effort to try and personally visit with as many of the neighbors as possible to review the plans, hear their concerns, and talk about things that we could potentially do to alleviate some of that. We did have some feedback from one of the neighbors. I believe it's off of 14th. There's a little cul-de-sac back here with regard to some of vehicle headlights and things like that. And so we've talked to that property owner and would intend on putting up some sort of barrier, whether that be trees or shrubs, again, to kind of shield the residents from headlights. So I think we've been very receptive to that feedback, certainly willing to work with people on those sort of concerns. Holly did have the question about the siren use that had come up. So in 2017, there were exactly 4,122 ambulance calls that we responded to in Austin. Of those, more than half were intra-facility or hospital-to-hospital transfers, which are non-emergency in nature, which left about 1,917 emergency calls. When you average out those emergency calls over the course of a year, that comes out to be about 5.25 emergency calls per day over a 24-hour period. The vast majority of those emergency calls, between 60 and 70%, are during the daytime hours or intervals, which would leave about 1.8 calls on average in the overnight hours. Typically, because we are accustomed to operating in residential neighborhoods, typically we try to be as absolutely respectful as we can with siren use in the immediate neighborhood, limit that when we can. Obviously, if there are higher volumes of traffic during the daytime hours, we would be obligated to comply with state laws related to emergency vehicle use. But again, in a 24-hour period, about 5.25 calls over that period, with about 1.8 occurring in that overnight interval. If we make the assumption that the overnight interval has less traffic, that would only serve to limit some of the siren noise. So again, we've tried to make sure we're projecting that to the west, away from the houses. The east side of the lot would essentially, I think we would probably intend to clean up some of the fallen trees and undesirable buckthorn and other weedy sort of things in there, but the intent would be to leave as many of the mature trees as absolutely possible that were healthy, and to maintain that kind of buffer between the property and the residents to the east. There is a fence along the Hardee's property to the north that currently exists. But again, our focus versus a fence was, we were leaning more towards some of the trees and shrubs that would be aesthetically pleasing and also offer kind of a sound barrier. So essentially that's where our thought process was, and we're certainly open to other thoughts as well.
And would those be mature trees and shrubs of size that you're already putting in?
I don't think we've gotten to the nuts and bolts of figuring out what the species of tree is. I know there's a certain limit as to the size of a mature tree that you can physically transplant and bring in. In the past, some of the trees from projects that we brought in have been pretty decent size. So, you know, I think we would try to select trees that served as a buffer, you know, and so rather those are bushes or tall shrubs or trees, you know, we would intend, I think, in working with the city planning staff to determine what best to do.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners?
Just to clarify your statement as far as siren use, then, it's not a requirement that they're automatically going to flip on the siren as soon as they leave. They'll go out and only use siren if necessary to clear passage through traffic then.
Generally speaking, that's correct. You know, the state law essentially requires us to travel with due regard. If the vehicle's in motion and the emergency lights are activated, you know, when it gets right down to the technicality, that would require siren use, but very often what would happen most practically is they would probably get out onto 4th, you know, start moving, and then, you know, a block or two away is kind of when, depending on the situation, the response will be ramped up. Obviously, that's highly subjective depending on the situation, the traffic volumes. You know, so I can't give you a clear black and white answer that it's always going to be this, but our intent with all our facilities is to be good stewards and neighbors.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, again, this is an open public hearing. Are there members here of the community who would like to speak? Yes. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Chichi Mosier, and we live at 1304 4th Street Northwest, directly south of the property you're considering. We received a visit from Gold Cross representative Chris Kelton. Is that how you pronounce it? Okay. On Friday, April 6th, informing us that his company was pursuing a zoning change for property located at 1400 4th Street Northwest here in Austin. Our home is located directly south and adjacent to this property. We received a letter yesterday, April 9th, regarding the Austin City Council hearing on April 16th. This letter incorrectly designated Gold Cross as the current property owner, making it sound like the deal was done and area residents would have no voice in the rezoning process. We were not informed of tonight's meeting until my husband spoke with Holly yesterday. And I will add here that Mr. Kelton told us that their purchase is contingent on the rezoning of the property. And as of yesterday, the courthouse said that Bruce Bodler is the current owner. We did not receive a call, and I have talked to a neighbor that did receive a call. We lived at the residence since January 1996. We've enjoyed the neighborhood and the convenient location of our home, which was a major factor in our decision to purchase it. Of course, being new to the community, we had no idea what kind of traffic flowed down 4th Street. As you consider rezoning 1400 4th Street Northwest, we would like to share our concerns. We have made a sizable investment in our home, located in a residential district, and to rezone adjacent property would negatively affect our property value. There are many commercial sites available within Austin that would not hinder the future valuation of residential properties. A study done years ago determined that 4th Street carried enough traffic to warrant a 4-lane street rather than a 2-lane street. Trying to ease the traffic congestion, the decision was made to add a stoplight, refigure an intersection, and add a turning lane at various points along the street. From our experience of entering 4th Street from our driveway or exiting 4th Street into our driveway when coming from the north. The problem has not improved and in fact seems worse. There is almost a continual stream of traffic that often exceeds the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit, making entering and exiting our driveway dangerous. This increase is due in part to the opening of Hardee's directly north of the property being considered for rezoning, and Subway, which is across the street from our home. Our current way to enter or exit is a rare 15 seconds to a more common 1 to 2.5 minutes. Our area is used throughout the day by walkers. There's no sidewalk north of the bridge on the west side of 4th Street. We have seen some dangerous situations as elderly people and mothers with children try to cross 4th Street in order to have a sidewalk on which to walk. It is often difficult even for those who can cross swiftly because of the volume of traffic and the speed of the vehicles. Allowing another business to open in this area would increase traffic volume, making this problem worse. There are many locations and empty buildings already zoned for commercial use available in Austin. My husband was told by Holly that several sites were considered, and of these, about half were in residential zones. To cut into a residential area is unnecessary, and to cut into one that is already having traffic problems is unreasonable. And of course, there's the noise factor. An ambulance would have to run its siren, 110, 120 decibels, in order to access 4th Street. It is our understanding that even if a traffic light were installed, the siren is required to trigger the light to stop traffic. You can imagine being startled any time, day or night, with a piercing siren. We were told a fence, trees, or bushes would be added to help with the noise factor. But as we all know, a screaming siren is a screaming siren, trees or no trees. Think about your own neighborhood. Our questions remain to be answered. Why consider residential zones when so many commercial sites are already available? And what has changed that would justify rezoning 1400 4th Street Northwest when the same property was denied commercial rezoning in 1999? While 1400 4th Street Northwest would put Gold Cross ambulance service close to Interstate 90, it would also put it north of most of the city of Austin, requiring racing down 4th Street to be of service to the majority of its residents. We appreciate the services that Gold Cross has provided provides to the residents of Austin and the surrounding area, but we believe there is a better location for their business, one that will utilize already existing commercial property. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your comments. So, is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes.
John Limerick again. I'm going to have Mr. Byram refresh his memory going back to the Burr Oak matter when they were changing Burr Oak Nursing Home into apartments. At that time, the City Council stated that 4th Street on the west side would be for business and on the east side would be residential. And what we're doing there is changing what the council approved way back in the early 2000s. So I'm asking him to refresh his memory.
I certainly remember the Burr Oak conversion from a nursing home into apartments. I remember that there were opposition from neighbors raising a variety of concerns regarding parking, traffic, the type of people apartments might attract to their neighborhood, things of that nature. The zoning code at that time and the land use plan in existence at that time said whatever it said. I would have to go back and look at the map on whether one side of 4th Street or the other was designated any particular usage at that time. Maybe Ms. Wallace has looked back. We have amended and modified the land use plan just a year or so ago. Whether any of this area was really changed through that process, I'm not familiar. The So I apologize. I don't remember a statement by the city council, and it would not have been a moment in time when the city council would have been asked to declare public policy regarding all of 4th Street, either east or west, or whether it was residential or commercial. Those designations would have been made within the comprehensive plan that existed at the time, future land use plan that existed at the time, the zoning code that existed, and zoning designations that existed. That was a question of whether the Burr Oak property itself, located where it was located, having been a nursing home before, surrounded on all sides by residential, could be a planned use development site for an apartment. As we'll talk about in our training later, planned use development sites are very, very specific and technical in nature already. So I don't know that there's a lot of comparatives to that site that would be relevant tonight.
Anybody else wish to speak?
Jim Stow, I live at 305 14th Place Northwest, and then on her Holly's diagram, I'm the house to the northeast of this project. I have the largest property line bordering them, and what doesn't show up in their aerial photo, there is partial fencing already in part of that because of a group home that was recently established. So there is a fence here at this point in time. Hardee's has a fence here. This area is open. I'm the one that addressed to Chris and to Doug the lighting as far as traffic moving in and out of that lot, because it'll shine directly into my house because I'm the one closest to it from that side. They've alleviated those concerns for me. Noise-wise, unfortunately, we live close to 4th Street. We live close to the on-ramp. We get all the ambulance noise. We get the helicopters flying in, so the noise is going to be there whether they're there or they're not there. The traffic flow is a big issue. I'm not sure how you're going to resolve that. Okay? I have a bigger issue with Hardee's collecting their garbage at 5 a.m. in the morning than I'm probably going to have with this. Okay? That being said, we've talked about it. I met with Chris and Doug tonight in the property. They know what my concerns are. If the shrubbery doesn't do it, we'll have to revisit the idea of a fence. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carol Limbrick.
Yes.
And I live at 1301 3rd Street Northwest, and I talked to Chris about this matter, and he has been very polite and very nice, I might add that. But we were talking about the commercial, why they didn't look at commercial sites. And I had spotted the one out across the street from Perkins, because it's big. It wouldn't be an issue getting out on the street. And he said, yes, he had talked to Mr. Favre about that, but it was a lot more money. And they couldn't plug into the fiber optic system that they can plug into at the end of our street. And I don't know how much fiber optic cables cost, but I think maybe there could be other commercial places that they could look at if that is not satisfactory. But it really, the layout is wonderful compared to where he's going to be. I would wonder if Gold Cross will at some point regret being on 4th Street, because if you don't live in Austin, you don't know how bad that traffic can be down there. It's horrible. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam Ansorge, 314th Place Northwest. So I live in the neighborhood near Jim. So my main concern, of course, is the noise, but also the traffic. I would say in terms of the traffic, we got to think of this street as one of our primary arteries in this town. We have a couple of main streets. This is really our main street. Perhaps Oakland, but this is one of our main arteries in our town. And every time an ambulance comes out and turns on its light, what's going to happen to the traffic? We're supposed to pull over, so it's going to slow down our traffic on one of our main arteries on a regular basis. Is that something that we want, is to increase the traffic problems on one of our main arteries?
Yeah, I'm Kelly Moser. I live at 1304 4th Street. Yeah, it's just like he said, the traffic is atrocious going by there. And I think you know, the last time when they went to do this, there was too much traffic, is why they didn't let them have it before, to change it to commercial. And now we've picked up more people, or more, well, Hardee's come in on the end, and Subways. That's added too from the last time they tried to do it. And I don't know, even trying to get out, or it's just atrocious. And I noticed those guys, you guys that stopped there tonight, did you have trouble getting out? Get out on the highway?
It took me maybe 30, 40 seconds. It didn't seem like an unreasonable period of time to
Right.
me, but then I grew up in Mankato, and the traffic there is comparable to busy traffic here, so I guess personally
Okay. What about the pickup?
yeah, I stayed a little longer.
Yeah, we just sat out there, we saw you guys over there, and I said, wait till he tries to get out there. That's my main concern. Oh, plus the noise.
All right, I'm Kyle Keenan, 310 12th Place. I live one block east of 4th Street. I agree with everything that's been said. The traffic is already pretty horrible. If you try to turn on 12th Place, if you try to take a right, most of the time I don't even try to take that road because it's so congested. So I would almost say this would be a public nuisance issue. I would expect eventually there would have to be some kind of stoplight put in, and with so many empty spaces in town, why would you want to impose on a residential area? We're also trying to keep a sense of neighborhood. We already have Hardee's that's far enough away where it's not imposing too much. We have a nice little neighborhood going. We don't want any more commercial. Is this going to set a precedent for Mayo to think that they can start coming back and buying up houses towards our neighborhood? And you are owned by Mayo. You're a subsidiary of Mayo.
We are.
So Mayo's calling the shots. All right. I have 13 questions. Will there be a stop sign added? We don't know that. Do we not know that at this point?
That would be, my take is that would be up to the city engineering staff.
Yeah, I raised that question, I think,
Is,
originally.
who's this guy, John Lane? What is his job?
Stephen Lang?
Stephen Lynn,
All right.
city engineer.
Why isn't he here?
He's not normally at this meeting, and he got some kind of communication that
All right. Some of these have already been answered. Have you done a traffic study in regards to this business? What the impact would be? For as far as you getting to a destination within 5 minutes, are you going to be able to get out of this space in enough time? It's going to take you 5 minutes to get onto 4th Street. Have you done a study?
Is that directed to us?
Sure.
So the answer is, have we done a traffic study of the traffic on 4th Street? The answer is no. What I can tell you is that we have many facilities in many locations across Minnesota and Wisconsin that are on busy roadways. Oh, I'm sorry. And historically speaking, in an emergency situation with the emergency lights that warn traffic, generally speaking, we have little to no problem alerting other drivers to the need to yield right-of-way in those situations. It's not historically been a concern. I would also respond to your assertion that Mayo Clinic is calling the shots. While we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Mayo Clinic, we have our own leadership. We're our own corporate entity. We have our own board of directors, our own budgeting process, which is apart from the wider Mayo Clinic. And we did look very closely at this property with regard to placement within the community, its ideal location, and our ability to respond to emergency calls effectively. This, quite frankly, is the most attractive parcel of property in the community for us. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we did look exhaustively at other properties, both commercial and in residential zones within the community, and for a variety of reasons, each one of those parcels that we looked at was not really acceptable in terms of meeting the operational needs of getting to the emergency calls within the community in the time frame that would be acceptable to us.
I think most of these have already been answered, but I keep thinking about the old Hy-Vee building that's just sitting there looking pretty crummy. And if you put something there, it would dress up that area and it would be close to the highway. And where in Albert Lee is your location? It didn't look like it was in a residential area.
So I'll try to catch those. Let me know if I missed something. So we've built several building projects. I think we're 6 capital building projects within the last 4 or 5 years or so in an effort to modernize our facilities. So I guess to a certain extent I'm a content expert in that I've been working with a number of contractors, including tech builders, on those facility projects. A building like Hy-Vee simply isn't designed for the sort of use that would need to be able to accommodate an ambulance facility. The facility that we're proposing is really a state-of-the-art facility. It has a project budget of $2.14 million. It's not a shed. I mean, it has all of the latest technology. We're planning on being here and continuing to serve the community, and the building is designed with the intent of providing us that operational flexibility for growth for up to 45 or 50 years. So when you go into another building, another commercial building such as the Hy-Vee, as you mentioned, that sort of flexibility and being able to design that space to really meet the needs for us to move into the future really isn't an option. So the other thing about those properties north of the interstate is that really impedes our ability to get down into the kind of the core central corridor within the community, which is one of the reasons why a number of those commercial properties were really not acceptable from an emergency response standpoint. One of your other questions, I think, was the facility in Albert Lee. I don't know how familiar you are with the community, but it is located on Clark Street, which is kind of one of the main central corridors through their downtown business district. It is to the west of that area, about 2 blocks from their central business district. There's a number of churches in the city park on one side, and there are private residences in a residential area on 2 other sides of that facility. In the process of working with the planning and zoning people in the city of Albert Lee, there were a number of concerns from neighbors, not unlike the concerns that we've attempted to address tonight. And all I can tell you is that since we've opened that facility in the neighborhood, we have not had a single complaint from any of the residential neighbors related to ongoing issues or concerns. And so we've really worked diligently with the neighborhood to try to be not just a business operating in the neighborhood, but to be neighbors.
My name's Jim Leask. I live at 1304 4th Street. Two properties adjacent to this proposed building. I have to agree with this gentleman here about the concern emergency vehicles forcing traffic to pull over to the left or to the right. I think that would be a logistical nightmare on 4th Street. It's already tough enough getting in and out. Just 2 days ago, my wife was coming out of the house and there was an accident right there at Quick Trip and Subway. And that kind of spooked her, you know, the crash and metal and everything. And that that's a busy gas station. That's just not a country gas station. That's a busy place. And Subway, the drive-through is continually being used. Just to cross from my house to go to Quick Trip, cross the traffic sometimes takes 5 or 10 minutes. So I could see the sirens flashing every time they try to leave the property onto the road. And it's only 1.8 calls a day, but that could be at any time of night, and those screeching sirens wake you up. You know, they're not light things. I was wondering, you know, there's an outlot just north of Shopko on in the commercial area over there by Hy-Vee. That's for sale. And that would give you quick response time to the highway, to anywhere in town. There's 7 interchanges in Austin. So you could get pretty well anywhere on the Highway 90 quick. And it would give you quick access to 14th Street, where you could get into the west side of town quick. It would give you a quick access all over town, and it would be closer to the retirement homes that are up there, the retirement residences, the apartments. There's a lot of retirement things going on up there, where the ambulances always seem to be screaming by our house north. They don't be going down south. They're always north. So anyway, my concern would be the logistical nightmare would be of the sirens going every, well, 6 times a day. So every 3 hours and the traffic stopping. It's already a problem getting out of our driveway and turning right or turning left into our driveway coming from the north is very hard. And I'm always tying up traffic. You know, I always actually pull into the center left turn lane to get onto 12th Street or 12th Avenue, just so I can let traffic by, because there's always 15 cars behind me, and if I were to hold that up, you know, that light would be like, it'd just be a nightmare. And I always kind of think of that. So anyway, I just wanted to add that for your consideration, and with that I'll pass. Thank you.
My name is Patty Schmidt, and I live at 412th Place Northwest. And I have kind of a greener concern. That property has some big, beautiful trees on it. I know the back side of it is pretty scrubby, but toward 4th Street there are some big, beautiful Norway pines, and I know because trying to get onto 4th Street, if somebody in front of you coming out of that intersection that's on the corner of 4th Street where Quick Trip is, somebody in front of you is trying to take a left turn, you have a lot of time to sit and look at the surrounding area. And to take those big, beautiful trees down and covered over with asphalt just breaks my heart. We seem to do that a lot in Austin, so I guess I would beg you to consider that as well. We take our big, beautiful homes down and make a parking lot. We take our root beer stand down and make a parking lot. And to me, this is, you know, probably a nice looking building, but I look at that picture and it looks like a lot of asphalt and a lot of parking, and I don't know, the symbol of our city is a tree. And we're gonna end up taking those big, beautiful Norway pines down, and that saddens me, so I'd ask you to consider that as well.
This is Kel again. She was talking about those trees. I talked to one of the guys that was over there, and they brought those trees over. Somebody's uncle or in-laws or whoever it was back in the old days brought over. Some of those trees were from the old country. This is just, you know, that's what he was telling me anyway. But I was going to, another thing I've got to say is on the property, you know, commercial property, if they just went across the interstate and by the funeral home there's a big lot there, that'd put them quick right on the interstate, and I mean, that wouldn't be, I don't know, it just, there's got to be more places. That 4th Street's just a bear trying to, the traffic is just, and then if they flip them lights on it, if they happen to put them on, that'll back traffic up. That's just my opinion, and it's, thanks.
Hi, I'm Bill Schmidt, live 412th Place.
But, yeah, if you want to leave our house and go up to 4th Street and take a left, you might as well forget it, because we just go around in front of the Baroque Manor there, or the apartments, and go up to the light. That's the only easiest way you can get on 4th Street, because especially in the winter when it's a little icy and there's so much traffic, you know, going shopping to, you know, around Christmas time, you just have to go up to the light. Otherwise, you can't get on 4th Street, you know. So I think it will be a problem, you know, as far as the traffic.
All right, I think I'll hand it back to Commissioner
Okay.
Keim.
Okay. I appreciate all the participation here and the comments. Any other questions from the commissioners? Concerns?
How many employees would this would there be on this property?
We have about 18 full-time and part-time employees that work in Austin. Our normal staffing patterns are that we generally have 2 crews that are available or on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's 2 employees per crew. So at any given point in time, there would be 4 employees working at the facility, if that's helpful.
And it looked like there was 4 bays. Does that mean there'd be 4 ambulances, or?
The building would be planned for 4 bays. Currently, we have 3 ambulances in Austin. For the short term or near term, we would continue to have 3. The rationale for adding a 4th bay was, again, our thought process was to build and position for future needs, and so cost effectively, if we were going to build, now would be the time to add a 4th bay to give that flexibility for the future.
And last question, sorry. It looks like on the drawing, it looks like the parking lot goes to where Arby's parking lot ends. It's just looking down the line, but that, if I understand, Holly, you were saying though that there's a 20-foot easement to the, or
There's a requirement for a 20-foot setback on the
Setback, yeah.
west and the south because of the residential neighbors or properties, but on the north, there isn't the same setback.
Okay, so basically that means though that where the property line looks like it's ending right now, theoretically could that theoretically be pushed east farther?
You know, I'd have to double check what I think it's, Doug, do you have the numbers that I gave you? I don't recall for sure what the north setback was.
I believe the north setback was 0 because it adjoins commercial.
And that's what I believe it is 0. So I agree that's something that could for sure be looked at if that's, I mean, is that what you're getting at is?
So basically on the east side, they could push back their property more, add more parking.
It's a 7-foot setback on the front from the property line. So there's some public right of way there. Is that the property line, Doug, in the front?
The dashed line is the property line, the dark line represents the setback.
The setback, okay.
So there's a 20-foot setback right now, and that means that they can extend this further on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the question what could technically be done in the new zoning district regardless of the current plan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And,
Yeah, technically, if you
to the
rezone,
right,
yeah.
I think that's east.
Yeah, if you rezone to the B3, is it that we're looking at tonight?
B2.
B2, okay, B2. The required setback is 20 feet.
Okay.
So if it's rezoned to B2 and this use and development does not occur, or at some point in the future, the
Right.
property is abandoned, somebody tears down this facility, it would be zoned for any of the uses that are listed in the support material, and its requirement would be a 20-foot setback, which would be far deeper into the lot than is currently being proposed. However, just traditionally, people have been pretty respectful of trees, and there's trees on the property in that location. So, but technically, the requirement would be a 20-foot setback, which is shown by the solid black line along the eastern boundary.
Yeah, our zoning code says that there's no setback required except where joining our district, which would be the residences.
Okay. Any other questions at this point?
I was just wondering if you see traffic as a fighter, like the way the resident sees it.
Well, I guess as we've considered and thought about the traffic very carefully, again, speaking from experience with a number of our facilities and other high traffic areas in other communities, we're not unaccustomed to dealing with those. I think as we think about the traffic from the operator of an emergency vehicle standpoint, I don't know that it reflects real well on this picture, but when we look at 4th Street, essentially there's 2 traffic lanes to the left and to the right. And down the center of that area of 4th Street essentially is kind of a, I'm not a civil engineer, but essentially it's basically a right and left turn lane that runs the length of the street. So from the perspective of an emergency vehicle operator, during periods of heavy traffic, the logical thing to do is, in an emergency situation, allowable by law, is that the ambulance operator would drive most likely down that center lane and wouldn't be weaving in and out of traffic that would still be on either side. So from a traffic standpoint, that way I don't see that as being a big obstacle for us, speaking from experience. The other thing is that we were pretty comfortable in talking, or through our discussions with the city engineer, they do seem to have some interest in a stoplight at that location, which is why the driveway alignment needed to occur the way it did. And we viewed that as a positive. I think overall, and have we studied it scientifically? No, but I think the amount of traffic that we would have coming in and out of our facility would be negligible in comparison to some of the other adjoining commercial property businesses like the gas station and the restaurant. Probably hundreds of cars per day coming in and out of those locations, very much less as we think about how our operations might be impacted. Again, referencing traffic, we did look, I assure you, very closely at the properties to the north of the interstate. They were not feasible from an emergency response, but even if they were, ambulances most likely would still be coming down 4th Street, and those same traffic concerns would still exist even with the facility located on the north side of the interstate.
Yeah. One more thing. We have a resident talking about pedestrian, and that's something too they took into serious consideration. So how do you look at that? Because these people are not in vehicles and they might be walking, and probably you might want to get out or maybe come in. So how will you handle that?
All I can say about pedestrian traffic is that of all the drivers on the road, our vehicle operators undergo very intensive drivers training, both defensively, emergency vehicle operations, and our ambulance paramedics and EMTs that are driving the ambulance have far more drivers training with regard to possible hazards, and pedestrians obviously are something that we are very cautious of. you know, the textbook sort of emergency vehicle driving course situation that, you know, we encounter and that we train on are children playing in the neighborhoods that are attracted to vehicles and things like that. And so that's very much on our radar screen. It's very much part of our driver's training that we're provided. And I would say we're probably far better equipped to deal with those sort of defensive driving situations than 95% of the motoring public. If that's helpful. So the other thing I would add is that each of our ambulances is equipped with a technology or a system that requires the operator to drive within a certain set of parameters. Those certain set of parameters monitor several things. They monitor aggressive braking. They monitor excessive G-forces within the ambulance. They monitor excessive speed, excessive acceleration. And anytime something like that would occur, there's an audible alert to the driver that is a reminder to them to correct their driving. And it also generates a score based on the number of miles that are driven and the amount of what I'll call negative driving behaviors that occur over that distance, and it generates a score. We hold our personnel to a very high standard in terms of keeping those scores up. So in instances where we have had drivers that have performed below those standards, they're held accountable through performance management. And quite frankly, if we have people that are driving recklessly, they're generally speaking not employed with us very long. So we do take that very seriously. So that is another safety consideration that we have built into each of our ambulances.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any other? Yes, John.
I have one question for Kevin here. Is the average ambulance calls per day in Austin, you stated, is about an average of 12?
The total number of calls averages 12. The total number of, emergency calls that
is 5
would
something.
be considered emergency was 5.25.
Okay. So say there's 7 that are non-emergency calls, and they're sitting on the driveway for 5 minutes waiting to get out onto 4th Street. Would they be tempted to turn the siren on?
I'm not going to sit here and say that you'll never hear a siren. I'm not suggesting that at all. I am suggesting that we try to limit that and be as respectful as we possibly can. But if it was an emergency situation, I would also assure you that we would not sit there for 5 minutes.
No, I'm talking about non-emergency situations.
Yeah, no, we would not allow our personnel to operate the lights or sirens in a non-emergency situation. That would be inconsistent with our own policies, but also inconsistent with state law.
Thank you.
I just have one quick one for Holly, because it's been a while since you talked about this, and I want to make sure I remember it correctly. But the current future land use map of the comp plan had this staying residential, am I correct?
It has its suburban low density residential.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
So the final decision of the Planning Commission would be to make a recommendation to the council regarding amendment of the future land use plan from its current designation to mixed use, and then also to make a recommendation regarding the rezone of the property from R1 to B2. And the council would make a final decision.
I don't think anyone's questioning how great of a company you are. You are a great company. You do a lot of good for our community. But by being in that location, you're adding another element to an already chaotic space. Even if you're coming out of there, we all know that a lot of people are on they're texting, they're on their phones, they're not paying attention. It's already stressful in that area without another element in that area. That's what we're concerned about. And if you are located across the highway by Hy-Vee or in that area somewhere, you would be able to bypass 4th by using one of the 7 exits off of the freeway. If you're going to Southwest, you could get on the highway, go over to Southwest. I would think that would be much faster than going down 4th, which is basically the busiest street in town.
I just wanted to note again that this was one of 2 options that they considered as far as what could be what would allow this at that site. So there's also the option of being a conditional use in an R1 district. So there's potentially 2 different options depending on the same use results. I guess if we wanted to have more control over the project, we would perhaps go with the conditional use route, but it appears that the proposed developer is willing to accommodate the requests that have been made to them regarding the project.
So the only advantage to going to a conditional use, I mean, it would be the same result, but in terms of more control, more stipulations, you mean, in terms of how things might be designed and...
Correct, to some degree.
Well, the difference is if we rezone it, then as Holly pointed out, this could be then used future for anything listed in that zoning. If it's a conditional use, it's temporary, so it's only 5 years if I'm correct.
No.
No.
That's an interim
variance.
use.
Thank you for correcting.
A conditional use is a use that is deemed to be compatible if you put enough conditions on it, and it allows you to address things like maybe an expanded rear setback, or lighting, or fencing, or other things that you could require, and it's specific to the use. So it would be a conditional use to use it as a medical ambulance service, so it couldn't then later be converted to, you know, a fast food restaurant or to one of the other things that's listed. A rezoning means everything listed in that zoning classification now becomes available if there's future redevelopment. If this use doesn't go forward, or if this use at some point becomes no longer necessary, you've rezoned it and you've opened up that whole universe of potential buyers. So what I mean, Holly's, certainly it's a good point to bring up that that was another option that was considered, and that would be another option this developer could consider if the current request doesn't get approved by the council after whatever it is you recommend, yes, no, or otherwise. In looking at a rezoning, I always remind you to think about that you are saying that the commercial uses, the interstate, the busy street, all the things that might lead to a conclusion that commercial uses are appropriate make sense at this location or doesn't make sense at this location, because you're really talking about a whole class of uses, not this particular development necessarily. So you have some assurances that it looks like they're prepared to go forward, they have the wherewithal to go forward, they're a company that's been in the community, so when they say they're going to build this, you might rely on that. But your decision has to be, is this location, considering everything around it and considering the long-term needs of the community, commercial or not commercial, or as is being recommended for the future land use map, mixed use, so that it could go either way? Is it that kind of property? Once you put that B2 label on it, then until someone rezones it again, all B2 applies.
So it would be somewhat limiting for future is what we're saying in terms of moving forward. If this 50 years from now or whatever we're looking at, it would be relooked at.
With a rezoning 50 years from now, it'll be whatever commercial owner would place on the property.
Okay.
A conditional use permit would be, it would still be zoned residential. Medical uses are a conditional use in a residential district. So you would say, conditionally, you can use it for a medical providing business if you meet these conditions. And then you would decide what those conditions might be. But that's not before you tonight, but that is an option that has been explored. That is an option that would be available within the local zoning code.
That's my question. So if we were not to go forward with rezoning this evening, that could be then presented at a future planning commissioners meeting?
Then the developer would have to decide if the site was still attractive under that plan and submit an application for that. New notices would go out for that, and it would be scheduled on a public meeting for that purpose. I'm not sure what the current situation is, but I know that you're located right off of Oakland, and I know that that's somewhat of a residential district, and so, you know, this is the problem with an ambulance business, is it has to go somewhere, and a lot of times those locations on busy streets in Austin also are adjacent in the backyards to residential, and this is the rub we find quite often.
And I would note that even though this is the future land use plan is estimated to be like a 20-year look into the future, after having adopted it for a year, there are already several areas where we could go in and do some amendments. So as you know, Attorney Byram had indicated, you know, looking at that particular location to determine, you know, really from a future perspective, what really does make sense there. Would it be really, you know, more amenable to residential? You know, you've heard a lot of complaints from the people who live on 4th Street as to their ability to use their properties the way that they want to as residential properties. But then you've also heard that the traffic would potentially impact any business or, you know, property located in that area. So just some things to consider.
Okay, so we've heard, yes.
I don't think it's good enough to look at the traffic and say, yeah, we could do it. I think there should be an extensive traffic study done on 4th Street, especially at the highway there. They should pay for it if they're interested, and then come to the conclusion, then come back and revisit this again after the traffic study is done. You know, look at the accidents that have happened. Look at the pedestrians that have been hit. Look at the problems of people getting around that area, because it is a busy place, especially at the highway. You know, I walk my dog. I can't even get across onto the on-ramp to go north without waiting and waiting and waiting. And then you have to run across because someone's either turning left or right, and they don't slow down. So I suggest it's not good enough just to say, oh yeah, well the traffic, we can deal with that. You know, let's do a traffic study, a real professional traffic study. You know, I've never seen anything on the roads counting cars, or I've never seen anyone sitting in a vehicle doing a survey or anything like that on that road. Maybe it's a good time to do that. You know, from what I hear, they're going to be redoing the bridge and all that stuff. We might need to widen the bridge. We might need to do a 4-lane through there or something. You know, I don't know. But I think it'd be foolish just to go on a speculation. Oh yeah, well it kind of looks good. Let's do it. And I think that was good advice you said about the conditional thing too. On that, I'll say thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so if I have this correct, we have, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your participation. Some options in terms of, first would be to approve or not approve the rezoning request tonight, or would we be
It would just be a recommendation to either approve or
Okay,
not,
to the
or
council.
deny the request for amendment of the future land use map and rezoning of the property.
recommendation to the council?
Correct. Recommendation, correct.
I guess I'm not hearing what commissioners what the feeling is, but another option seems to be continuing to look at this as a conditional use.
I would not continue it to look at as a conditional use. That matter's not before us. It may not be acceptable to the petitioner.
Okay.
They may not want to bring forward the project if that's the requirement. The conditional use too would require potentially, because it would be an R1, still an R1 zone, there would be different zoning requirements, although as noted we can add some additional conditions with regard to that project were it to go that way. But I would just move forward with the...
So the matter at hand then?
The only reason we would continue it is if there was some, vital piece of information, I think, that we didn't have.
Okay.
That would allow you to make a decision on this particular petition.
Okay, I guess that clarifies then the matter at hand is what we have in front of us tonight. And that is to consider a request from Gold Cross to approve a rezone, the property located at 4th Street Northwest, from R1 residential to B2. That is what we have before us.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say that it's good that everyone came out tonight. It helps us work through the process to hear both sides. I think we heard a lot of reasons why there's advantages to this site and disadvantages that were well stated by both sides. And it's important too that this is strictly a recommendation to the council. Regardless of what we recommend or how we vote, this whole process is going to repeat itself essentially at the next council meeting. So regardless of which side you're on or which way it goes, you're going to have to go through this again. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to make a motion to recommend the council to not approve this request.
Say that again, to
recommend the council to not approve this request, to rezone this area.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Lutz to not, recommendation of the council to not approve the rezone request.
I would second that.
I have a second from Commissioner Postma. Any other discussion?
So this would be to keep it as R1 based on this recommendation as, or the, what we brought forth, right?
To not change it, correct.
And I know we generally don't have a lot of discussion, but this one has been more to discuss. So as commissioners, if there, I'll just be honest, I haven't quite been, I consider a rezone kind of the highest standard for me, and I just haven't been persuaded at this point, but I'm still listening if there are other commissioners who feel differently.
I think there's a motion on the floor.
And we have a second. Any other discussion then, beyond that? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes to not rezone the property at this time. Again, it'll be before the city council. Next meeting is the third Monday. Next Monday.
Correct. So it will be, the next meeting will be April 16th at 5:30. And the recommendation will go to council, and council will consider the matter again at that time for final decision.
Thank you again all for coming, participating in government. Anything else for us, Holly?
We do have a training session after the meeting. If the commissioners are able to attend. Hopefully the new commissioners for sure. Otherwise, I have nothing else.
Thank you. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's unanimous, so I think we... Thank you.
Holly, do you want to speak?